Welcome back. This is week 3, lecture 1, part 2. And here I will pick up right where I left off. We're talking about the Greeks and the ambiguity of Greek identity, and the ambiguity and the tragic ambiguity of the Greek soul, so to speak. And to get at that, we're going to then look at Plato. Now, Plato, too, as you know, his Republic, is the focus of your term paper. And this lecture dealing with Plato is going to, I hope, help with that. It is not something that you can then take as a substitute for actually reading the Republic, but I hope it will help you approach it to focus on the aspects of the Republic that I think are most essential for writing your term paper. So let's look at Plato. Plato lived there 427 to 347 BCE, really represents kind of the birth of philosophy in ancient Greece. Now, yes, there was philosophy before Plato. Plato was the student of Socrates, and Socrates is seen as one of the great philosophers, wise men of the Western tradition. We still talk about the Socratic method of asking questions, and Socrates would go around asking questions. Now, there were also philosophers before Socrates known as the pre-Socratics. But in terms of a comprehensive understanding, we really see that beginning with Socrates and with Plato. The problem with Socrates is that he didn't write anything. Everything we know about Socrates comes from other sources, and primarily Plato. Many of Plato's works are dialogues of Socrates. Socrates is talking to other people, and Plato is writing it all down. And it gets very difficult then to distinguish what is the philosophy of Socrates and what is the philosophy of Plato. And that gets into the whole issue of Plato scholars and the analysis of Plato. And we have different periods of Plato's writings and what is actually his thoughts and what is he repeating the thoughts of his teacher. And it's not clear exactly. So I just want you to know that Socrates we know through Plato, and he's mentioned in other sources too, so it's pretty certain that he was an historical figure. But we don't have his own writings. We have Plato and the Socratic dialogues. And the Republic is such a Socratic dialogue. It doesn't mean just by two people, because the story goes like this, basically. That Socrates and some of his friends were attending a funeral for a mutual friend and colleague, a statesman. And they get together and break during the festivities, and they're sitting around. They start talking. And the question comes up about what is justice? What is justice and what makes for a just state? And Socrates asks questions. And that led to the whole dialogue of the Republic. Now, Plato wrote the Republic after the death of Socrates. Socrates was put to death in 399. He was put to death for treason. What happened was that in the aftermath of the Peloponnesian War, which kind of Sparta came out more or less on top, Athens, which had been this beacon of democracy, philosophy, literature, was defeated. Now, I know I said earlier that kind of actually who won. Sparta sort of came out on top, but they beat each other up, and it was not nice. And so Sparta established what's called the 12 tyrants to govern Athens. And these 12 tyrants were attempting to establish order, and they didn't want their authority to be questioned. And what did Socrates do? He was questioning authority. Socrates was questioning everything. He was put to death for undermining the state, for treason, and the morals of the youth. He wasn't undermining the morals of the youth because he was, seducing young Greek men or boys. He may have been doing that. That's a very natural part of Greek life. But by asking questions, why? If any of you are parents or those of you who may become parents, one of the most irritating questions your kids can ask you is why? Why? There's no into it. Also showing my age, going back a number of years, there used to be a bumper sticker to question authority. It's like, yes, authority has to be questioned, but what does that do? That undermines the authority. So Socrates was just saying, okay, we ask questions. Again, we still talk about questioning being this Socratic method. And that will lead us to truth. Truth is this ideal out there somewhere. And supposedly the whole thing is Socrates, as a young man, went to see the oracle. And the oracle said, Socrates, you are the wisest man who's ever lived. And he's like, no, I am not. To prove you wrong, I'm going to go out and find the wisest man alive. I'm going to do that by asking questions. No, he never got there. So Socrates started teaching. He was a teacher. And Plato was one of his students. Because how to question, what to question, is difficult. And after Socrates was charged with treason for corrupting the morals of the youth, he was condemned in prison, and he accepted his fate. He accepted the authority that he was still questioning. He did not say, he did say, I didn't do it. He did not say, I'm not corrupting the morals of the youth. He just said, okay, I disagree, but I will accept the decisions because the political power is essential. And the political authority is essential. And he drank the hemlock willingly. Supposedly, the last thing he said was, oh, remember, I forget the person's name, a chicken. Please pay that debt for me. And dies. Plato was so bothered by the death of Socrates. How could Athens put Socrates to death for asking questions, for teaching? It's a question we should be asking ourselves. Is my goal to corrupt the morals of the youth? All of you? In some ways, yes. I want you to question. I'm not trying to undermine or counter, but I want you to question, why is it the way it is? Why do I believe what I believe? Why are we being told what we're being told? What is that based on? Analyze and question. And that's why Socrates was killed. So Plato writes the Republic in response. Now, it's about 20 years after Socrates' death that he writes it. And please do read the introduction to Plato's Republic in the Oxford World Classics edition that I've assigned. That gives you the whole context as well. Plato's Republic, too, is disputed by scholars. Is he being satirical or ironical? Because this whole basis of justice and what is the just state is what Plato's trying to get at. And the model he comes up with, which I will be discussing briefly as you will be reading, is a state that basically is a totalitarian state. A state that is far more like Sparta than it was like Athens. So the whole question is, was Plato positively arguing for this model is indeed the most just state possible, the Kallipolis, the beautiful state is what the Greek means, Kallipolis. Is it really a just state, or was Plato being ironical, kind of saying that this is an unjust state and it's more like Sparta, so therefore. Now, that is not what I'm going to go into. I'm not a Plato scholar to discuss what each of those different positions are based on, but I just wanted to point that out. But I want you to read the Republic. I'm going to be presenting the public as if it is still a philosophical dialogue seeking the truth and seeking the answer to the most just state, regardless of whether that was Plato's actual position. We know in his later work on the laws, it is not in keeping with the model of the Kallipolis as in the Republic. We see here, too, the distinction between the ideal and the reality. The question is Plato's Republic trying to get at this ideal just state, the state that is as just as possible? and then realizing that the practicalities of governing and of a state cannot live up to that ideal, but how do we then approximate it? That tension between the ideal and the quote unquote, I'm not going to say reality for a reason you'll see in a minute, the practicality of actually implementing it or realizing it is this tension that is there throughout the Western tradition and is still with us today. The question of what is justice, we'll talk about shortly again, becomes central to the entire myth of the West of who we are, seeking justice. So, how does it all work for Plato? What is justice? What is a just state? That's the question. And for Plato, we have to understand something that is of fundamental importance, because I have it there on the slide. What is a just state? Philosopher kings. Because his point is that for a just state, philosophers have to be kings. You say, what the hell is that? He's just saying that he himself should be king. No, he's not saying that whatsoever. It's a very complex argument, but it is based on this philosophical concept of what he referred to as the world of forms. The world of forms. Let's see, I'm just going to go back here. But there's the allegory of the cave, which I'm going to actually start there. So I'm going to start with the allegory of the cave, even though I have that after the allegory of the metals, to try to illustrate and get at what Plato is meaning by this world of forms. And that will help us understand in the allegory of the metals. Again, I'm presenting this in this lecture thematically, not going through the text chronologically. So you'll see how he builds up his argument when you actually read the Republic for your term paper. For Plato, there's the world of forms. The allegory of the cave in the Republic goes like this in general. And Socrates says, imagine, Thrasymachus, that we all are in a cave. There's a cave, people are living there. It's all dark. And there are all the slaves, these are all slaves in the cave. They're working, and here's a wall, and they can see the wall. They can't see anything behind them. All they can see is forward, like this. But this is how they have to work. There is a fire behind them, so the fire casts shadows on the wall. So all they see are the shadows. They can't see each other. They can't even look to the side to say, oh, yeah, but there's a difference between the slave, my fellow slave over here, and what I see. All they see are the shadows. He says, for them, that's reality. He says, yes, absolutely. They can't see anything except what's in front of them. And what's in front of them are shadows. They don't know that a fire is back there. The cave wall is not a mirror. All they see are the shadows. That is what they see as reality. And it's also saying that if you grew up in that, it's not saying that all of a sudden you're thrown into the cave as a slave and enslaved and put into the cave. It's saying that is where we are. That is the condition we're in. We have grown up in this cave. This is all we know. All we know are the shadows. And you can't start asking, well, how does that work if you have a child? Because if you can't have a child if you're just looking at shadows. Okay, anyway, that's beyond the point. Okay? That's why it's called the allegory, because it's trying to make a point. If that were the case, all you see are shadows. That for them is reality. Then let's say one slave escapes the cave for whatever reasons. He doesn't go into that either. Turns out, sees the fire and sees that there is a way out of the cave. And he finds his way out of the cave and comes into the real world. And it's like, oh my God. First of all, the eyes are like, he has to adjust. It takes a while. And he's struggling. But as his eyes start to adjust, he sees this beautiful world of color, of nature. He sees the sun, the trees, the sky, the birds, the animals. It's like, oh my God, this is so beautiful. This is perfect. And this is real. My God, I've always thought this is just the shadows. And that person wants to stay there, but he says, I have to tell everybody. So he goes back into the cave and says, hey, everybody, guess what? There's a whole world out there, and it's beautiful. There are colors and everything else. How do the slaves in the cave respond? You're crazy. this must, what got into you? You're hallucinating. You're absolutely insane. Get out of here. We can see what's in front of us. So he goes back out, says, okay, fine, I'm gone, and lives in reality. Now, Plato's argument with this allegory of the cave is that, you know what? He says, we, right now, all of us today, are slaves in the cave. What we see before us are only the shadows of the real world, which is the world of forms. The ideal world of these ideas, eidolon, or forms, or also later referred to as universals, that is this beautiful world that we don't see, because our experience of our daily life, what we see here, what we can sense and taste and touch and everything else, is only a shadow of that true reality in that world of forms. Now, the world of forms is not a place, it's an intellectual place. And then who has access to that? Only the philosophers. The philosophers tell the people in the real world what the truth is. They don't believe them because they can't see the world of forms. So this leads to this tension between those in the cave, or those that focus on our sense experiences, and the philosophers who know the true reality. That's why I didn't want to use the word real before in terms of the person coming out of the cave, because the reality for Plato is the world of forms, which is far more real. I don't want to say realer, that doesn't make much sense, but is the true reality, and what our phenomenal world, our experienced world, is simply the shadows thereof by participation in that. We only see part of it. That concept for Plato was essential, because concepts and ideas like justice, like truth, like the good, like the beautiful, are all forms. And if there's anything in our experiential world, in the cave that we live in, that we can refer to as just, or justice, or beautiful, or whatever, or good, they are so only in relationship to those world of forms. But only philosophers have access to that world of forms. In essence, that's the allegory of the cave. So for Plato, true reality, truth, and justice, and everything else is that world of form, that ideal world that philosophers can't access, that most people don't believe. There you go. That's the tension. Therefore, in constructing this argument in terms of philosopher kings, the question is, can we have a just state if our rulers don't know what justice is? That's a difficult question. Can we? Can we have a just state if our leaders or those in government don't know what justice, what true justice is? And Plato argues no. Therefore, only philosophers should be kings. But there's a problem. Philosophers don't want to be kings. The philosopher wants to stay up in the world of reality, like the slave who escaped and got out of the cave and saw the real world. Especially when the people aren't going to believe him. So that then led to Plato's view of the structure of the Kaliopolis, the just state. Because if we want to have the most just state possible, we have to have philosophers as kings. What makes for a philosopher? He says, well, there are inherent qualities to people. There's no such thing as a quality. For Plato, equality is a very modern concept. And this is what gets to the allegory of the metals. He says there are people with natural innate abilities. And so, you know what? We still have innate abilities. Not everybody's equal in terms of their innate abilities, whether that is their intellectual capacity, whether that is their physical capacity. Not everybody can be a Michael Jordan, for example. Not everybody can be an Olympic athlete. Not everybody can be a concert pianist or a great entertainer. We all have, in some ways, putting it in. I'm not trying to explicitly use this term, and I find this rather disgusting in some ways. The Christian, so-called Christian view of we all have our special gifts, but secular, completely divorced from any kind of religious understanding. Human beings today, we all have our special gifts and aptitudes and abilities, and they're not all the same. I won't go off to belabor that point, but that's what Plato was getting at. He said that there are some people by nature who are the gold people, the metal gold. Those are the philosophers. Then there are those people who are silver. The silver people are the people who can grasp the truth of philosophers, but are not themselves philosophers. Then there are the bronze people who can't understand it at all, but are essential to every state. And then the slaves, iron. So we have gold, silver, bronze, iron. Now, the gold are called the guardians. They're the guardians of the state. The silver are called the auxiliaries. Those are the ones that help the golden rule. The bronze are the artisans, the work people who do actually the work, and the iron are the slaves. They don't really have much of a choice. Now the problem is this. How do we determine who's what? The guardians, the group of the gold people, determine what class people are in. Interestingly enough, for Plato, it's not that only the guardians, only gold people have gold babies. 2 bronze people can have gold babies. Slaves can have a gold baby. It's not based on status of where you are. It's based on this innate ability. Women can be guardians. It's not also just male. Women can be guardians. And so the whole point, this group of guardians, the gold people, determine who is in what class, because they have the philosophical insight of truth in that ideal realm to be able to make such a determination. The whole problem with this structure, Plato says, is it gets all messed up if self-interest infects it and corrupts it. So the whole point of constructing this just state is to get rid of self-interest. So once the guardians determine where a newborn baby is, what status, that baby is taken out of their family and raised by the state in common. So the guardians can't even know who their own offspring are, because that would introduce an element of self-interest. As Plato says, that guardians might need to make the decision that we need to go to war, but they have one of their offspring in the military. They might not need to do that. Now, the auxiliaries are the military. And these people are the ones that understand enough. They realize this is the way it really is. I can understand enough of the philosophical view that say, yeah, I agree with that. And they are the enforcers. So it really is a militarized state. Because the other thing Plato then argues after all this, he says, you know what? Can we have the most just state possible if we don't have the best of everything possible, or the best possible of everything? Best possible food, clothes, music, entertainment, everything else. And the answer in discussions was like, well, no, we can't, because that wouldn't be just. So then the question is, can you, if you say, okay, what do you want to be? Well, I want to be a baker. Well, really? Okay, you can be a baker and bake bread. But you know what? That's not your best skill. Your best skill is actually making clothes, being a seamstress. I want to be a seamstress. No, you have to be a seamstress. And you can only be a seamstress because only if you develop that skill, which is your best aptitude and skill, to the highest degree possible, can we have as a state, as a collective, the best of all possible things. Same thing with entertainment and singing. If we were organizing ourselves in this virtual community as a Plato's Callipolis, it's okay. How many of you can sing? Oh, yeah. But really? I might say, I want to be the singer. I'll be the singer to sing for everybody. I think I'm great. And what would you all say? Oh my God, please no. We cannot have the best of all possible worlds if that is, we just let people do what they want. So what we have to do is discern what people do the best. What are their natural aptitudes? What are their best natural aptitudes? And they have to develop those natural aptitudes to the greatest degree possible, which means that's the only thing they can do. Philosophers can only philosophize. So in this group of the guardians of the gold, there's no marriage. They can mate with whomever they want to. That's not a problem whatsoever. But there's no marriage. The children are ruled by the state, and self-interest is taken away. They are provided for by the state equally in a comfortable, nice living, but there's not this competition for who can be wealthier. So if you're actually part of the leading core of the guardians, and let's say you're going to be the leader of it, you don't get a higher salary or better living conditions than anybody else. And the whole point is to get rid of self-interest. And Plato even says towards the end, he says, anyone who wants to rule is not qualified to rule. That, I think, should be pasted on the mirror of every American in their bathroom. What is our politics today? I want to be. It's me. Get me. Pick me. It's turned into this popularity contest of what I want. And for Plato, it's like, no, the guardians don't want. They have to be forced to rule, just like the baker has to be forced to bake, or the singer has to be forced to sing, or the seamstress has to be forced to sew. You have to do what is your best natural ability, quality, and develop that to its highest extent. Only then can we have the best of everything. That is the basis for the medals. Now, on the lower level, slaves and the bronze, self-interest, you can't really get rid of it because that's what kind of is their nature. So it gets to be this very hierarchical, structured state, and it all depends on the guardians, or actually, it also depends on the auxiliaries, because the guardians don't want to live that way. They have to. That's the issue. Because only the guardians can know what justice is, what truth is, that they are the only ones who have access to the world of forms. And the auxiliaries know that, and so therefore force the guardians to be guardians, and force everybody else to have do what they do by nature to the highest degree and the best. So we can have the best of everything, so we can have the most just state possible, the true Kallipolis, the beautiful city. That's what that is all about. It's like, okay, then they say to Plato or Socrates in the dialogue, how are we going to get the common people to buy into that? He goes, here we go. I'll tell you why. Because Socrates and Plato also argue, he says, you know what, part of this Kallipolis is going to be based on truth, because truth is one of the forms, and therefore the poets should be banned. The poets being Hesiod, Homer, because they tell lies. Poet tell lies. All these talks about the gods and everything. And I mean, the gods in terms of the Greek gods and the stories and the myths about the Greek gods. Plato certainly had this concept of a deity, at least a principle, but not Zeus and Hera and the Paris whole thing and a bunch of hooey. That's all lies. So in the Kallipolis, we really should get rid of all poets, except it's called the noble lie. That's how we get the common people to buy into all of this. And the Republic ends with what's called the myth of Ur. And the myth of Ur goes like this. Ur was a soldier. And he's actually on his deathbed, and he's on the pyre. He's died. And so as he's on the pyre, as they're beginning to light the fire, his soul takes a trip to the afterworld. The other world, whatever it is, Hades and the Elysian fields, and he sees this division between Hades and the Elysian fields, the good and the bad, rewards and punishments. And it's like, okay, and this guy tells him, okay, what do you think? He goes, well, I want to definitely be part of the good. He goes, well, you have to live right. You have to be a good citizen. You have to contribute to your city to be good, to achieve the Elysian fields. If you're not, you end up in Hades, which is punishment. Now, this bifurcation of the otherworld, afterworld, afterlife world of punishments and rewards was not a creation of Plato. The concept of Hades and Elysian fields was not a creation of Plato. But he says that's all lies. But that's what we tell the people. Because if we tell them this noble lie, that you need to be a good contributor to society, you need to be a good citizen and do what's required, or you're going to go to Hades. That will bring the common people on board who have no understanding of the way things really are. Whereas the auxiliaries, the silver people, have some understanding. They aren't philosophers themselves, but they understand the whole system and are the enforcers of it. And the guardians, they may not like it, but they are the ones who have access to reality, to true reality in the worlds of forms, who really know what justice is. So therefore, that's how we get the common people to buy into the system. So we don't have to simply, physically force them and enslave the whole population. We get them to buy into that by telling them the story of the myth of Ur and the afterlife. So Ur then goes back to his body, wakes up on the pyre, and people say, "Oh my God, what happened?" And he tells them this story of what he saw. It's like, oh my gosh, because he doesn't want his friends and family members to end up in Hades. So he tells them what they have to do. They have to be good citizens and follow what the leaders say. That's the myth of Ur. And that's Plato's Republic. And it really comes out to be this totalitarian state. Would anybody want to live there? Probably very few, if any. But can we have a just state that's not something like that? If you want to live in a just state, do you want to live in a just state? Yes, I think most of us would say yes. We want to live in a state where justice rules. The question is, how do you achieve that? And Plato's argument results in the just state being a totalitarian state. How do we respond to that? It's like, well, yeah, but that's not practical because people don't want to live that way. Fine, but then that doesn't refute the argument whatsoever. That's what we're getting at. And that's the problem. That's the tension, which even Plato himself realized and recognized because, again, in his later work, The Laws, from the late Plato period, he's more practical. So the issue is this the ideal that we should be striving for? Is justice and the just state an ideal in the world of forms that we should try to strive for, even though we're never going to achieve it for theoretical as well as practical reasons? How do we handle that tension? That's what it's all getting at. And yet, then, that's not the only approach to it. And Plato wrote a number of dialogues, again, as I said, it's no problem, was a teacher himself. He established the academy. He had students, and one of his students, known as known as Aristotle. And Aristotle, even though he revered his teacher, also disagreed with him about a lot of fundamental issues. And in so many ways, even though Plato is still with us, in so many ways, Aristotle is really more influential and more a component part of what I can refer to as the mind of the West. That's not to say that Plato is not part of the mind of the West. He is, just as Sophocles is and Homer is, this whole tension, as I've tried to portray it, between us and them, between ideal and the reality of the ideal, the true reality, and the tension of this, and the ideal of idealism and practicality is part of the Western tradition. And with Aristotle, it's that way too. Because the whole issue is then justice and what can be justice, and that is something that becomes the defining question of the Western tradition in so many ways. And Aristotle took a different approach. Now, again, just like with Plato, Aristotle would take too much. Both Plato and Aristotle are specialized areas of scholarship for researchers who spend their whole lives studying them. And there's debates all over the place. So this is very much condensation, just hitting some of the highlights. Aristotle was so important for logic, physics, politics, and influence. He wrote voluminously on, let's say, all fields of philosophy. And one of his basic premises, in distinction to Plato, was that there nothing is in the intellect that was not first in the senses. See, Plato's view of all of that and the gold and everything was based on the reincarnation of souls. When you die, you go up and then you're in a holding place, and then you are getting into fate, and you descend, and you remember everything. That was Socrates' view. You know everything because your soul was in the divine realm. You know everything, but being re-embodied, you forget. You have to pass through the river Lethe. You forget. So the whole issue of education is one of asking questions to help remember, because everything is already here in us. We know it. We just have to remember it all. Aristotle said, no. Everything comes through our senses. We are, he doesn't say this would be used later on, a blank slate at birth, and everything we receive through our senses. There's nothing in our intellect that was not first in our senses, whereas for Plato, it's like everything is in our intellect, we've just forgotten all of it, or most of it anyway. And the whole education is a process of remembering. And Aristotle said, no, the whole basis of education is learning new things based on sense experience and logic. Aristotle was central for logic. It became the foundation of logic, in some ways still is. And I'm just going to explain. I'm not going to go into all the issue of logic and everything. Leave that for other times or other courses. But just the whole approach to logic Aristotle developed in his prior and posterior analytics is based on what's called the syllogism. I have it for the slide. The syllogism, major premise, all A is B. Minor premise, all C is A. Conclusion, therefore, all C is B. That is almost irrefutable, just like mathematics. 1 + 1 = 2. That's irrefutable. You can't say it's not unless you start playing around with, but is that in base 10? Or I don't really understand the notation there. These are logical, universal truths. The syllogism is a formal logic, is irrefutable. Until you start putting in specifics for the variables. Once you start replacing A with something and B with something and C with something, then there's all kinds of problems in terms of how the syllogism could fall apart. And the syllogism, that's first figure, first mode syllogism. It's called the basis of the demonstrative syllogism, which is the basis of certain knowledge. All A is B, all C is A, therefore all B is C. That produces certainty, certain knowledge, which is scientific knowledge. And for the Greeks, as for the Romans, as for them throughout the Middle Ages, knowledge was scientia. Scientia was just certain knowledge. Scientia is the basis of our word science. And those meanings of science and scientia knowledge, they start becoming divorced towards the end of this course. But throughout this course, they're one and the same. Different types of knowledge and ways of knowing. But science is just part of the whole. Science is the whole thing. Now, that's for later, and also for H114. But it's based on logic. Now, the physics for Aristotle, was that everything can be analyzed into the causes, and we can't really know something unless we know the causes of it. And for Aristotle, there are 4 basic causes: the material cause, the formal cause, the efficient cause, and the final cause. And unless we know all 4 causes of something that we come across, we won't understand it, we won't know it. The material cause is like what it's made out of. I'll take an example of a chair. Right now I'm sitting on a chair as I'm giving this lecture. What is the chair that I'm sitting on made out of? Well, wood and bamboo or whatever it is that I'm sitting on. That's the material cause. What is the formal cause? The formal cause is the shape of it, because there are different shapes of things that we can call chairs, or at least things that we sit on. What is the efficient cause? The efficient cause was whoever made this chair, constructed this chair, even if it's a machine, but what I'm getting at, was the efficient cause. And then the final cause was to be sat on. So the final cause is what it's all about, what's its purpose and goal. The efficient cause is what makes that possible, what makes the thing possible. The I'm sorry. The material cause is the stuff that it's made out of, and the formal cause is kind of the actual shape. But then that term form gets into and gets connected with the term form of Plato and the Plato form. So what is it, especially in later thought, is that formal cause one of these ideal forms? Or is it actually kind of the shape? And everything could be analyzed in that way, not just chairs, not just physical things. There are material causes of everything. And just right now, I'm working on Giles of Rome, and it's a long story, but his lectures on the sentences. He's late 13th, early 14th century Augustinian theologian, and this is his major theological work. Basically, is his course on theology to his students. And he divides theology up into these four causes. We can discuss the material cause, the formal cause, the efficient cause, and the final cause of theology as a field of knowledge. And he spends most of the time on the material cause. So material is not just stuff or things, but also a field of knowledge can have material causes. And it can be very complex, and it is very complex, and I'm still struggling with it myself, so to speak. But I just want to put that all comes from Aristotle and this analysis of all that is into to these four causes is a means of trying to understand things. And for Aristotle, we can only know things when we get to the causes. Now, with politics for Aristotle, he starts off instead of saying, okay, there is an ideal state. He says, human beings, or man, the human beings, by nature, is a political animal. The idea of politics is not to have the most just state possible, but to have a good state. And what makes for a state being good? The common good. So the whole purpose of government is to provide for the common good. The problem is, how is the common good defined? Now here we see Aristotle too saying it's not about the individual good. It's not like what's best for me. It's the common good. Just think, you probably have heard these two little phrases I'm going to use just in terms of American politics and things, just to contrast it. I'm not taking sides politically. I mean, I have my political views. But I think this is interesting because JFK, John Kennedy, which I'm assuming you know of JFK anyway, in one of his famous speeches, he said, "Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what can you do for your country." That is the focus on the common good. Now, some 17 years later or so, Ronald Reagan said in his campaign slogan, "Are you better off now than you were 4 years ago?" All of a sudden, the shift is not is from the common good to the individual good. It's like, no, we're not asking about what is best for the country as a whole. It's like, what is best for you? I can give you what's best for you. And it's this transition from the common good to the individual good. The problem is, how many individuals are there? What might be good for me is not going to be good for you, is not going to be good for the country, unless I say what is good for me is good for the country. That's problematic. But this gets too far into my analysis or discussion of American politics today. The point is to understand Aristotle. For Aristotle, it's the common good as a whole is what the whole point of politics is, because unless we can have the common good, we can't have a good state. In terms of the political structure and nature, it all grows up for Aristotle from the family. There's the family, the community, and the society. And there's politics in every one. Ethics, for Aristotle, is how do I actually live for myself? What's the basis for my doing what is right and good? Economics is how do we structure the family? And then politics is how do we structure the society? And this hierarchy of family, individual, family, larger community, state, is this buildup of how Aristotle saw the political structure based on his experience and observation. Aristotle was very much into observation. He wrote on animals, he wrote on physics, and on everything else. He also wrote on the soul, psychology. That's how it was kind of structured. He says, in terms of the state, so beyond the level of the individual, the family, and even the community, the society, the state, there are good forms of government and there are bad forms of government. The good forms of government are monarchy, aristocracy, and polity. Monarchy is defined as the rule of one for the good of all. Aristocracy is defined as the rule of the few for the good of all. And polity is defined as the rule of the many for the good of all. Now, Aristotle said there's also the corrupt forms of these versions, the bad forms. The bad form of monarchy is tyranny, which is defined as the rule of one for the good of himself. The bad form of aristocracy is oligarchy, defined as the rule of a few for their own good. And the corrupt form of polity is democracy for Aristotle. Mob rule. Demos means people, and democracy is the rule. It's just like mob rule, where everybody's out for their own self. This was later put into what's called the Cycle of Constitutions by Polybius, where he says we go from monarchy, which gets corrupted into tyranny, whereby a few people leading people in the community rise up to overthrow the tyrant and establish aristocracy. They start getting corrupted by self-interest, and that turns into oligarchy, whereby then all the citizens, male citizens, rise up and establish, throw out the oligarchy and establish polity, and that devolves into mob rule until finally a strong ruler reasserts authority with monarchy. Cycle of Constitution. That was not Aristotle put the two together, just pointed out, but then Polybius said there was a cycle. We can understand history as going with this cycle. Just think about that for a bit. But that's how it all came about for Aristotle. And the whole point was the common good, the good of all, not individual good, which also was a point of Plato's, as I said. But for Aristotle, it's a very different approach. Now, that is very quickly the difference between Plato and Aristotle in terms of politics. Aristotle was also a natural philosopher. I'm not sure if I'm going to go into this. To his physics. Physics for Aristotle was simply change, and how everything's change, and motion, and what is motion. All change is motion. And these are the elements of nature in Greek thought. This is important too because it's for the Middle Ages, and maybe I'll come back to this and try to abbreviate it here because I know this lecture is already getting way over time. But for the Greek mind, there was earth, water, air, and fire were the four basic elements. Now, these were not actually, you've heard this pre-Socratic philosophers, Anaximander saying everything is fire and everything is water. It's like, what? You're crazy. These are as abstract elements as we have today. Now, each with the element, everything that is a composite. All the elements have their natural motion and their natural qualities. So the natural motion of fire and air is up. The natural motion of water and earth is down. And fire is hot and dry. Air is hot and moist. Water is moist and cold. And earth is dry and cold. So they're also opposites. And we can understand all of physics based on analyzing the composite beings of everything that is. Anyway, I'll come back more to that when we talk about medieval science. But it's based on Aristotle and Greek natural science. And natural science is just philosophy, the natural philosophers. So that's where we get from that. But the whole entire approach of Greek thought was to understand what we observe. And this is where Aristotle comes in. I have up here Greek science and natural philosophy to save the phenomena. That means we observe the phenomena. How do we account for it? That's the question. The elements of the heavens, it was different in terms of astronomy, the cosmos. We know there's the earth, we know there's the moon, and it was a geocentric universe, which again was the basis of the medieval universe coming from Ptolemy. So there's not just Aristotle, this is later Ptolemy. Earth at the center, they knew the 9 of the planets, or 8 of the planets anyway, and then there's the realm of outermost stars. I'm not going to go into the details here. Maybe I'll come back to this. We're talking about medieval science because this was the basis of medieval science as well. But in around 235 or so BCE, so 200 more, over 200 years before Christianity ever arose, a Greek natural philosopher by the name of Aristarchus said, I can say the phenomena better if I put the sun at the center. And the other Greek philosopher said, Aristarchus, you're crazy. Why are you crazy? Because, yeah, we can see that. But to make it all work out mathematically, to say the phenomena, the realm of outermost stars, we have to be so far away. My God, we can see the stars. The Greek universe, or cosmos, as well as the medieval cosmos, was a small, closed cosmos. You can see the stars. There were no telescopes. There were no microscopes. Only observation. Only what you can see with the human eye. And the achievement was amazing. Also for medieval science, that I'll be talking about later on. But for Aristarchus, he's like, oh, okay. He's been known as the Copernicus of antiquity because he advocated or suggested a heliocentric universe and was rejected, not because of Christianity, but because of the impossibility, unimaginable distance that would have to be involved if Aristarchus was right. I'll be talking more about that later. But that is what I just wanted to put forward that for now, in terms of the Greeks. Now, finally, Greek reflections. We are inheritors of the Greeks, as I think, and I hope, as you can see, in terms of our approach to learning, to knowledge, to politics, to truth. And in so many ways, the Greek mind became the Western mind, transformed. It was really there. And somehow there was for the Greeks, and still somehow today, there is this strange, tense, but almost unified relationship between religion, philosophy, and science, because everything for the Greeks and throughout the Middle Ages, we'll see, all knowledge is science, scientia. Scientia, whether it is of the divine realm, of the cosmos, or of the human realm. And this concept of the just state, the ideal state, and then the practicality of the state is still the problems we're dealing with. Whether we take the Platonic approach or the Aristotelian approach, what is the common good? That is as much an ideal as is the most just state. How do we achieve it? And the tensions there, and the tragic tensions there, the tragic nature of the unrealizability, what a horrible word, the unrealizability of the ideal, whether that be the common good or justice, with the capital J of the just state. That tension is there, the same way it is with the fate, and whether we can thwart our fate, even if we're trying to, the ideal and the reality. What do we do about it? How do we handle that tragic nature of the human experience? And that's what it really gets down to. How do we handle that, and what do we do about it? And that is something the Greeks led to us, this concept of seeking this ideal within a very messy reality. Because ideals, if we don't take the reality seriously enough, can lead to horrors, can have led to horrors, if we start to think that the ideal is realizable, rather than accepting the tragic nature of knowing that it is not realizable. That's the issue. So the inheritance of the Greeks, for all the positives, for all the extent to which they have formed our very understanding of who we are as Western people, Western civilization, there's that tension, and if we lose one side or the other, we have problems. And that is why, as we'll get to next lecture, Virgil ended up saying, also talking about the Trojan War, which I'll talk about next lecture, I fear the Greeks, even bearing gifts. Greeks bear gifts, but those gifts can be seductive. Ideals are very seductive. If we don't have ideals, what are we doing? How do we mesh that all together? Leave it here. Thank you for your patience. Next lecture, week 3, lecture 2, will also probably be long, but not this long. I hope to God. So thank you for your patience, and again, we'll make up the time as we go along, but it won't be for this week. It won't be within the time limit this week, but thank you for your patience, and I will see you again rather soon. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.